Alright, let's deal with Encounter 2. Last week you guys saw me do a guide on Slothazor, the first encounter of the second wing, and today I want to continue that with a guide for the second encounter in Salvation Pass, and I have to say straight away, guys, this encounter is way easier than Slothazor. In fact, I found both this encounter and Encounter 3, Matthias, despite what people seem to be touting so much of during the first couple of days, both Encounter 2 and 3 seem thoroughly easy to me in Salvation Pass, and really for the future, it seems ArenaNet might be loading a lot more of the raiding difficulty onto optional achievements. They've said more or less this much already in some live streams, rather than the actual core content. That's not to say that it's ridiculously easy. Anyone can go in and face roll. It's back down to dungeons level or anything like that, because it's really not. But you can clear this stuff way quicker with far less progression now, I feel. I'm not really sure where I stand on that. On the one hand, it does mean even easier farming for your weekly clears. It means you get to be more casual. It means you get to be more relaxed. It means you get to play more comps and more classes without any stress once you've generally got the idea of the encounters down. But then on the other hand, is that really what I signed up to raids for? I wanted the difficult stuff. I want it to be pushed each week. Shouldn't the consistent thing we do not be the one-time only optional achievements, but more the, the consistent runs we do every time? I'm not really sure. If this is, by the way, for the purposes of accessibility, I think they're kind of missing their marks too. If ArenaNet saw, hey, maybe they want even more people to do raids based on how many they saw doing the Spirit Veil, it's kind of a weird thing to then open Salvation Pass with such a rock wall in Slothazor, and then you get the easier stuff afterwards. But maybe that's just my own personal experience of Slothazor, because again, some groups did clear it a fair bit quicker than mine. Maybe we can compare Encounter 2 that I'm about to talk to in this video, more being akin to the Spirit Wall Chase encounter from Spirit Veil, rather than, say, Gorseval or Veilguard or Saboteur and so on. Also, as an addition, because we got through this encounter so much quicker, I don't know the absolute ultimate ins and out details of what every single little mob's every little ability is, and honestly, you don't need to know that much. I did jump in TS for some clarifications on some of the mechanics I'm a little bit more hazy on, as this encounter does encourage a little bit more splitting, but really, everything we're about to say should quite comfortably be able to get you through the encounter, so let's talk about it. Number one, the setup. Basically what happens is you defeat Slothazor, you go out of the cave, and suddenly you're in a big open plain. This feels like a Guild Wars 1 map. Okay, it's a large area, but it's instant. And it's, you're 10 players. There's lots of random small pockets of patrolling mobs out there. It almost feels like you're vanquishing the damn place as you fight them. But in the center of this large, beautiful, junglish valley, where the occasional snowstorm suddenly blows across your screen, you find a big bandit fort. Don't forget the general narrative right now. The idea is we are going in to save some captured packed soldiers. And in this bandit fort, which you can fly into using some jump pads, you'll actually find a cage in the center of the area with your friends. There's also happens to be a lot of explosives set up around the cage, and upon infiltrating the hideout, the bandits decide they want to kill you all. And the idea of Encounter 2 is that you are to defend the cage from oncoming bandits for 9 minutes straight. If they destroy the cage, they destroy all of your friends, and then that is failure there. So the first thing you do when you move into the fort, it starts the 9-minute timer. There are already some bandits in there. The generic snipers. Snipers, as you can already see from the footage, actually do quite a lot of damage. This is me being caught out of position at the start of the eventually successful run here. And they'll knock you down quite hard. But there's also, the key thing in this encounter is a lot of environmental buffs that help you out. Different effects, different things you can interact with that will help you destroy these bandits. Actually, outside of the bandit fortress is a little camp where you can read some journals, tipping players off to some of these mechanics. You hear, for example, that the bandits have been kicking the cages and spitting at wargs that they have caged up there, and so the wargs hate the bandits, and if you release the wargs, then they do insane damage, and they can help you clear out as many ads as possible. So this is kind of a mix of lots of small enemies rushing in that you want to keep their numbers down, but also a few, just like with Saboteur, big bosses, 3 particularly, that come in that you also have to deal with as fast as possible. Before we talk about the bosses, to talk about the actual enemies themselves, because the encounter's a bit easier, like I say, you don't have to dive into their details too much, but do be aware that, like, the clerics, they will heal one another, and if you are caught alone around a lot of them, or if you let their numbers build up too much, they are going to overwhelm you, so at all times, do focus on them. This encounter is kind of funny in that if you DPS the bosses out quick enough, it can be like, oh, what should I be doing? And absolutely the answer to that question is keep killing the random ads that are in the area. People who have a focus on pulling enemies in next to bosses so they get cleaved down at the same time. A pretty common tactic you see in most places in Guild Wars 2. You want to be employing that as much as possible. And there's really not too much more to say about those generic forces that will come into the fortress through the main gates at various intervals as the fight goes along. But then there are some special enemies that will spawn as the encounter goes along, and these you need to focus on. First, I want to talk about Saboteurs, okay? So, Saboteurs are fairly squishy, regular bandits that will come in. The game will let every player know when they have spawned, and their job is to run up to melee next to the cage, at which point they will start setting up big explosives that do huge damage to the cage. Don't forget, there's two ways that you can wipe it. Number one is all of your players dying, but number two, the bandits are actually trying to destroy the cage as much as they're trying to destroy you. The Saboteurs will ignore everything else and go straight for the cage, so you have to deal with them. When they get to it, they'll start setting up their explosives. They'll have a break bar, which is fairly easy to break, but if you don't break that break bar or kill the Saboteur in time, they'll detonate on the cage and do massive damage to it. Let just a couple of Saboteurs through, and it's game over. So you need to keep your eye on that the whole way through the encounter. I think most groups, when they start out, will try killing the Saboteurs, and they'll freak out, and they'll try and start damaging the Saboteurs while they're running to the cage trying to get the jump on them. You really don't have to worry about that, though, because if you simply break the break bar, that Saboteur will essentially become a regular enemy. They'll stop their original idea and task of destroying the cage, and they'll just start shooting at you, and they will never try to detonate the cage again. So you only have to break that one break bar, and it's pretty easy to do. So that's my recommendation. Instead of trying to kill them and worrying too much and panicking and splitting your group too many ways, just let one person always be aware of the Saboteurs and make sure they have the capability of breaking any break bars, and then you can kind of ignore them from then on. Same can be said about another type of enemy that also spawns throughout the encounter. So this is an enemy that actually spawns outside of the fortress. You see, the event doesn't take place entirely within its walls, but also there are enemies that will go outside of the fort and set up mortars. This is the same concept. They have a break bar, which if you manage to break, they'll become regular enemies. But if you don't break the break bar, it will spawn mortars within the tree fort, within the fortress. These mortars can then be killed after that point, but they do huge damage. Massive AoE nukes completely fill up the screen, and if there's lots of mortars that get set up all at once, there's a huge pressure on you and the cage straight away, and it basically spells disaster. So you want to treat these guys like the Saboteurs. The difference is one of your players is actually going to have to leave the fort to get out there and get to them. It's a pretty easy task at first, because at first you only have one enemy to deal with. One will spawn, you can CC him, go back in. Then a little bit later, two will spawn, you can CC them both if you're a little bit better and go in. And then three will spawn all at once. I do know specifically that the Herald I was playing with is Staff 5 and other CCs, is, you know, like his Dragon, his Glint ability and so on. Still found it very comfortable to interrupt all of those break bars 1v3, but do be aware if you're going out there alone, it's a slightly more risky strategy, and once you break the break bar, again, they become kind of regular enemies and will shoot you and can actually do quite a lot of damage, similar to what you saw me doing to the snipers before at the start of this video, so be aware of that. After the 3 spawn, you'll actually have some enemies that set up mortars spawn in completely different areas too. It's not difficult though, you just have to play the encounter once or twice, set up a couple of squad markers that your players understand what they're marking off. Hey, this is where some mortar team enemies are going to spawn, and you can be prepared for it. It's kind of, you just do a couple of runs, learn what's coming and when, and you can deal with them. But those are two mechanics constantly flowing through as you continue the fight. Then also, you have the bosses. So, there are 3 large named bandits that you have to deal with that will also pose significant threat to you. If you can't kill them quick enough, they'll build up and you'll have to fight all 3 at once if you're really that bad, okay? So you can already see there's a little bit of splitting going on. And here's where the encounter gets even more interesting. So, first of all, you have Bergspawn. Bergspawn's a little bit into the encounter. He is a big hammer-wielding bandit who takes a while to kill. Many of his animations seem very similar to, like, Mordrum Punishers. He kind of has that big swing attack with the cone in front of him. It's a break bar, just kind of like Knuckles as well from the Saboteur fight, where you want to CC him as quickly as possible and deal with him. But he's also very tanky. Now, here's the thing. He's quite slow with his hammer, and as the bandit journal outside the fortress explains, He doesn't like bees. In fact, he's allergic to them, and there are bees' nests up in the trees above the fortress. So dotted around the fortress are jump pads. And similar to with Saboteur, you can throw a special ability at your feet, a little bomb. It will launch you in the jump pad, and you can get up into the upper areas. So what you want to do as players is knock these beehives down in preparation for when Berg is going to spawn. And then one of your players can pick up one of the beehives and throw it. And that's going to not only do a little bit of damage, I suppose, to Berg, but also it puts an effect on him called Not the Bees. And this slows him down significantly. This helps you deal with him. This lets you burn through him that much quicker and makes him way less of a threat. Now, the bees don't stack intensity. There are a lot of beehives. You might be tempted to throw all of them at him at once. You don't want to do that. You want to throw some bees at him, and then when those bees expire, grab another hive and throw it on. The best way to do this is just assign one of your players in the group. Hey, yeah, you're going to be the bee guy, all right? You're going to deal with the bees on Berg. So, bees go onto Berg, you can get him down. Really, you do want to see him die before the next boss, Zane, spawns, and that isn't too hard to deal with at all. Just remember that while you're fighting this boss, you have to keep aware of Saboteurs, you have to keep aware of random ads coming in, and you have to keep aware of mortars being set up elsewhere too. Next boss is Zane. So Zane will come in a little bit later. You should have comfortably had Berg dead for a while ago. And Zane also, just like Berg is weak to bees, Zane has his own weakness too. Zane is weak to wargs. So around the fortress there are cages with wargs in them. By pressing F on them you can release the wargs, and wargs will do ridiculous damage. For example, if you release the wargs early to help you deal with the initial snipers that are in the fortress before Bandit starts sending in reinforcements to assault you, they will one-shot these snipers, while it could take you as a player quite a while to, kill them on your own. So really you just want to flood the place with wargs and they'll zerg down Zane. The wargs will, however, they won't necessarily go on a beeline for him. They'll go on any other random ads in the area too. So the more control you have over the other ads in the area, the more wargs that are likely to get on Zane quicker. And this will really kill Zane fast. It's actually very important you kill Zane fast because of his abilities. Berg was a hammer guy. Zane is very similar to one of the bosses we already fought in the Saboteur encounter, in that he has this kind of triple shotgun attack that gets its AoEs bigger and bigger and bigger after each of the 3 strikes. Not only this, but he moves quite a lot as well. His aggro mechanic seems to favor people who are far away from him, and he will teleport to them. Kind of similar to my Trin from Fractals. And when that happens, he's then going to do his shotgun attack. His shotgun attack does a lot of damage to the cage, and it is very easy to cleave the cage on its second and third hit because of how big it gets. So the one of the biggest threats in this entire encounter, in my opinion, is Zane's big shotgun attack. You want to make sure as much of your group is standing away from the cage. This way, when Zane does his ability, it's not going to hit the cage. There's less risk because he's casting it completely away from it. That does get complicated, though, when he likes to teleport away to people who are far away, and people have to go far away sometimes to deal with saboteurs that are coming in, or mortar enemies, or whatever else may be going on the map. So that can complicate it a little bit. It does feel a little bit RNG-ish, but if you're very specific with your positioning, as raids often call for, you'll be okay, and you can get him down without the cage really even taking any damage. The third and final boss is known as Marella. Now, the story kind of sets up that Marella had been communicating with Saboteur, and Saboteur had taught Marella how to amp up her flamethrower, but Marella's not too great with it. So the final thing in the area are oil barrels. There's maybe around 6 or so of them, and unlike with the bees, which didn't stack intensity necessarily, the oil barrels do. So what you want to do is hold Marella with her flamethrower in a very specific place, make sure she doesn't move from it too much, and throw a ton of oil barrels on her. She will ignite them and do ridiculous damage to herself. You want to kill her quickly for several reasons. It gets very hard towards the end of this encounter. She's got a lot of deadly attacks I'll go over in a second, but those other mechanics, the mortars getting set up, you'll actually see on this successful run here, things are really chaotic for my team. I end up in downstate as the encounter ends because we'd missed a couple of mortars that were getting set up, and suddenly there's all these AoEs going all over the place. You need to burn her down fast because the encounter actually ends as soon as she dies. Though it looks like it's a defense encounter where you have to survive for 9 minutes, they just cut it short after you kill the final boss. The second she dies, it just ends regardless of how much time is left on the timer. So it's very important that you get those oil barrels on her, you blow her up. There are a couple of other techniques as well you can use to do big damage to her. For example, she has a flamethrower, and this works just like the Flame Legion from, say, COF. What does that mean? It means it ticks lots of packets of damage very fast. You're also in a raid where she can hit 10 people at once, in theory. So if you're stacked and everyone has retail on them and she does the flamethrower into you, as long as you're in a position where your team's not going to die from something like that, it can really do ridiculous retaliation damage straight back to her face very, very, very fast, and you'll see her melt all the more quicker. Not only does she have that, though, but she also spawns fire tornadoes. This makes things a bit harder. Think about the dragon stand, where you have one of the big Morgemoth enemies that would, like, suck people into these vortexes that get spun around. That's what those fire tornadoes are. Those are very dangerous. You do want to avoid those, just as you will encounter 3 when they return as well. But if you just have a couple of people range, if they're, you know, range damage, maybe stand on a ledge so that they can DPS down, as I've been told. You can actually avoid a lot of her damage, blow her up very comfortably, and as I say, the second she dies, the encounter ends. So it doesn't matter how much chaos is going on elsewhere, once you've got Marella dead, that's the end of the encounter, and there's really not too much more to say. She does also, for what it's worth, have a final ability. That's the flak ability you saw from Saboteurs, and that can paint a lot of fire in melee and make that quite deadly to stand in. But with the correct aggro control, she aggroes on the person with the highest toughness. Each of these 3 bosses is aggroing on a different thing, it seems. With a little bit of control of that, you should just be okay. And before the 9 minutes is even over, that's encounter 2 completed. So like I say, a lot more relaxed, a lot easier to deal with, but you should have seen from my discussion here how much you can rely on environmental stuff to help you get through those bosses. The wargs on Zane, the bees on Berg, and the oil on Marella. And here's the funny thing, the achievement is asking you to do it without touching any of those mechanics whatsoever. That's where the encounter is going to get a lot harder. That's where the pressure of people splitting up to deal with these different tasks as well as fighting at the same time really will start to shine. And that's going to be an interesting video I'd like to talk to you guys about when I clear it for myself, hopefully at some point in the future. There you go, guys. That's encounter 2. At the end of it, you save your friends from the cage, and you move to a very interesting place where one final boss remains, Matthias, who I'll talk to you guys about next time. Best of luck in there, guys. Hopefully this was interesting to you on some level, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Dude, just jump on there and tie it. I just did this.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. No, I was tying it the wrong place. But it's fine.
You have a lot of slack there, and good job. You know, we're really showing that, you know, we've done this already, you know? This is all a ploy, guys. It's all a ploy. Oh, really?